The story of how animals have changed history is above all else the story of how animals have helped us to make history. It's the story of the animals that have worked with us and for us, to feed us and clothe us, labour for us, fight for us, and be our friends. This is the story of the animals we have created. What humans could have achieved on their own had no animal ever been tamed, domesticated, carefully bred, is uncertain. But it would have been far less than we see in the world today. Which is why our story talks about animals that have changed history. Imagine a great big world and you so small. Imagine a world populated by creatures larger than you, faster than you, stronger than you. Throughout our history, there's been hard work to do, which other animals were more equipped by nature to do. Our ancestors only survived because other animals helped them. We provided the brains, they lent us their brawn. It's a step no other animal has taken. And when we learned how to enlist their help, everything changed. We were free to use our time for other things, things that have made us who we are today. And it so easily might not have happened. The average human being weighs about 80 kilograms and stands about 165 centimetres tall. We're not particularly large or strong by animal standards, and not very fast. Still, we do get around. We are the most prolific builders the world has ever seen. We grow and raise immense quantities of food, thanks to amazing machines like these. But most of the powerful and high-tech modern machines we take for granted today have come into existence quite recently. Before their invention, we made use of other kinds of machines. Living machines. Animals that could do what we couldn't. The combination of their brawn and our brains was the most important and defining partnership in human history. In the beginning, we brought wild animals into our world so we could eat them. We no longer had to risk our lives hunting or energy gathering. But there was one particular beast that had more to offer than any other. The oryx, the wild ancestor of modern domestic cattle. During the Neolithic Revolution, around 6,000 years ago, when agriculture and animal domestication were growing, early farmers prized the oryx as a provider of meat, dairy, and leather. But there was another gift the powerful oryx still had to give.
They'd select the more placid ones, they'd kill the more dangerous ones, or at least sequester them. Some genius thought, we have this cart, we're pulling it, it's full of grain. Let's make those cattle pull it.
Up to this point, Neolithic farmers had used digging sticks to make furrows for their seeds. It would have been time-consuming and exhausting work. The domestication of cows had led to the use of oxen as draft animals that could help the farmer plough the fields using a more advanced form of digging tool called an ard. Over time, these early tools and techniques were refined. And ox-drawn ploughs changed everything. Planting and harvesting took much less time and effort. One of man's enduring inventions, the plough, has been a basic instrument throughout recorded history.
Agriculture through the ages, from 47 BC to the present time.
We still use them today, although they are now pulled by mechanical beasts. It would be hard to overstate the importance of cattle in our modern world. But as a draft animal, oxen were overshadowed by another domesticated animal long before the advent of modern machines. The horse. A draft horse, one specifically bred for manual labour, could work faster and cover more ground than an ox over the course of a working day. This higher productivity yielded noticeable results. Larger fields meant more crops. And of course, a surplus of food meant that a greater number of people could be supported. As populations grew, things began to change. Changes that would transform the world in which we lived. But perhaps horses have had an even greater impact upon our history in other ways. The first modern horses evolved about 4 million years ago on the dry grasses of the Central Asian steppes. They had longer legs than their ancestors and single-toed hooves, which made them much better adapted for running. Early humans probably first encountered them no later than 30,000 BC. When we first find them depicted on cave walls. These were clearly wild horses that humans hunted for food. As Neolithic hunter-gatherers began to see the advantages of animal husbandry, there was probably an intermediate period where horses were kept as livestock for meat. But things didn't stay that way for long. An adult human male can carry about 25 kilograms over a long distance. A horse can carry about 125 kilograms. But put a wheeled cart behind the horse and you've got a partnership that can pull twice the horse's weight. A 450 kilogram horse can move 900 kilograms of cargo. That's a whole lot more than we could move on our own. But there was one very different use to which early people put the horse, one which had just as great an impact on human history, maybe even greater.
For pastoralists, they would have known how horses behaved, how they were inclined and sort of what their hierarchy was and their complex social structure. And so it's an easier step to go to then ride them.
Surely this must be the most graceful way of travelling cross-country.
A horse can gallop up to 50 kilometres an hour, faster in short spurts. In half an hour, a rider could be more than 30 kilometres away, in a completely different landscape that none of their people had ever seen before. It put isolated groups of humans in touch with others and created networks of interconnected peoples. Once they learned how to control their mounts using bridle-like pieces of hemp or animal hide, early humans would also have been able to herd large flocks of sheep, goats and other livestock as they searched for fresh pastures. The horse may also have had a hand in building the first large towns. Horseback riding raiders could attack horseless settlements and escape with ease. The victim's only recourse was to build towns with fortified walls to keep the raiders out. Horse riding also changed the face of another characteristically human occupation: war.
Before you had horses used in war, you basically had a lot of people in massed infantry ranks throwing themselves against each other and trying to grind each other down until one side broke and fled.
Some experts believe the wheel's invention was actually driven by the need for a way to make warriors more mobile. In other words, the chariot. Although chariots were initially invented in Mesopotamia, it was the Egyptians who first made them into effective war machines. Introduced to North Africa by the invading Hyksos armies in around the 16th century BC, the Egyptians quickly set to work on modifying their design. Egyptian chariots were lighter, faster, and stronger than their predecessors, transforming the Egyptian army into one of the most formidable in the ancient world. The chariot changed the nature of warfare for centuries to come. Those who had them won. Those who didn't.
Without having advanced intelligence that the other side had chariots on their side, an army seeing these things coming at them for the very first time must have been terrified. They didn't know what they were, they didn't know what they were going to be used for, and to see these things charging down at them at really high rates of speed must have been absolutely terrifying.
Of course, for chariots to be effective, they required a relatively flat terrain. And so the chariot was eventually overshadowed by a military tactic that utilised horses in a different way. Widely considered the greatest military commander of the ancient world, Alexander the Great was the first to use shock cavalry in battle. Squads of horsemen that could lead the charge into large numbers of infantry. Largely due to his brilliant use of cavalry, Alexander was never defeated in battle. And his expansion of the Macedonian Empire forged a culture and trade bridge between the Mediterranean and Asia that would have far-reaching effects. As a direct result of Alexander's conquests, Greek culture and language began to spread into Asia, which created a common language for commerce. His empire fostered a safer environment for trade between Asia and Europe, not only in commodities, but an unprecedented exchange of ideas, philosophies, and political ideals. Many classical Greek texts only survive to this day thanks to copies contained in the Egyptian library at Alexandria. Even though Alexander's rule was short-lived, his influence would be felt for centuries to come. While he was one of the greatest military tacticians in history, his greatest legacy was not forged on the battlefield. Alexander's conquests were followed by times of peace. An era in which Greek philosophies and political ideals permeated and flourished throughout the known world. Infusing Hellenism with their own cultures, new empires emerged. Empires that would eventually become the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. And it was accomplished largely on the backs of horses. As the birthplace of the tamed horse, it's not surprising that the Eurasian steppe produced some of the greatest horsemen in the history of war. The Hun. But their style, as well as their horses, were very different from those of Alexander.
It was the horse that made them mobile. Otherwise, they'd be walking with their sheep and goats and not get far. And it was their ability to shoot with a bow and arrow and manoeuvre quickly that gave them the advantage.
The advantage of having the mounted archers was that they could attack the enemy simultaneously on the flank while their comrades were attacking them at the front.
Attila's great successes against the Roman legions in the 5th century AD were due primarily to his hit-and-run tactics, which in turn depended on his horsemen archers. Centuries later, Genghis Khan, emperor of the Mongol Empire, conquered most of Eurasia and China on the back of mighty war steeds. At its greatest extent, Genghis's empire covered over 17 million square kilometres, roughly the size of Africa, from Central Asia to Eastern Europe, north to Siberia, and south to the Sea of Japan. Farming, high-speed transportation, the invention of the wheel, the development of large towns, a revolution in warfare. The horse played a vital role in all of it.
And here are some of the four-footed land workers. They certainly do their bit in war and peace.
Today, in most of the developed world, the horse is no longer used as a primary means of travel. Nor is it the mount of choice for warriors. Even farmland is ploughed by mechanical horses, with even more stamina than a real one. Though roughly 100 million horses are still used for transportation and farming worldwide in developing nations. Of course, there are still jobs it can do that can't be done better any other way. And it doesn't use a gallon of fossil fuel. The horse's days of changing human history are probably over. But we owe this strong and intelligent animal a debt of gratitude for making possible some of our most significant advances. But horses too are indebted to man. Horses in today's world have not thrived despite this enduring relationship, but because of it. The wild horse species of our planet died out long ago. Horses now only exist as domesticated animals or as horses that have been reintroduced into the wild, like the Mustang of North America, the Brumby of Australia, and Przewalski's horse of Mongolia. While horses combined strength, speed, and versatility, they did have their limitations. There were regions and climates where they were out of their element, especially the polar regions. But one animal seems to have been born to the cold: the Arctic dog. In today's world, dogs kept as pets hold a significant place within our hearts. After all, where would we be without man's best friend? But throughout history, dogs have been much more to us than mere companions. Much, much more. The Arctic dog breeds, including the Alaskan Malamute, Husky and Eskimo dog, are descended from the dogs that came across the Bering land bridge into North America with the earliest settlers. They were indispensable to these first human inhabitants because of their superb adaptations to the snow, ice and cold of the Arctic. They are powerful animals with a thick fur coat that protects them from the elements.
Note the long tongues, a feature of the husky breed. They seem to enjoy every second of the race.
They have an insulating waterproof coat to trap warmth. Small ears reduce the risk of frostbite, and thick paw fur protects the feet. They are built for endurance. The dogs can pull heavy loads of supplies and people across the snow.
Polar dog's endurance is legendary. The longest recorded self-supported sledge journey across Greenland covered over 1,000 miles. Nothing to a good dog team.
Today, the Inuit use the Arctic breed mostly as sled dogs to help them travel to hunting areas, sniff out the seal breathing holes and bring back the meat. Understanding the importance of these dogs to surviving in polar regions made all the difference in a race that caught the world's attention during the first years of the 20th century. It was the race to the South Pole. Between 1901 and 1904, English explorer Robert Falcon Scott led a team to find the pole. He failed. Between 1907 and 1909, Ernest Shackleton tried. He too failed. In 1910, Scott set out again, and his expedition made landfall in Antarctica in January 1911. For transportation over the frozen terrain, he'd brought with him 12 ponies. Also in 1911, another team, led by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, left its Antarctic base with 52 sled dogs in search of the pole. A few years earlier, Amundsen had successfully traversed Canada's Northwest Passage. During his travels, he and his crew learned a lot from the local Inuit people about Arctic survival skills, especially the use of sled dogs for transportation.
Amundsen is staking the success of his expedition on his dogs, the oldest and he feels the most reliable means of polar travel. Unlike Scott, who has been trained as an English naval officer, the Norwegian prepared himself from boyhood to be an explorer.
Scott had a real issue with mistreating and killing dogs, so he felt that it wasn't right to shoot dogs along the way. Amundsen didn't have the same qualms. He fed the weaker dogs to the stronger dogs and felt that it was about efficiency and nothing more.
Scott's ponies were ill-suited to the terrain. Their hooves slipped on the ice, and sweat from the exertion froze on their backs. Dogs don't sweat. In addition to dense insulating fur, Amundsen sled dog breeds had evolved powerful muscles to withstand long hours of hard work. Their webbed feet acted as built-in snowshoes. The arteries that supplied their paws with blood were designed to keep them warm and prevent frostbite. 9 of Scott's 12 ponies died before the expedition to the South Pole even got started. The rest were unable to climb the Beardmore Glacier, which lay halfway to the pole, and had to be sent back. But Amundsen's dogs were able to do it. The team reached the South Pole on December 14th and planted the Norwegian flag. When Scott and his men got there 5 weeks later, hauling their gear and provisions themselves, they found Amundsen's flag. The Norwegians and 11 of their dogs made it home to Norway. But the Scott expedition perished on its return journey, exhausted and starving on the frozen Antarctic continent. Both Amundsen and Scott knew that taking dogs meant some would die. The weaker ones would be killed to feed the other dogs and the human explorers. Amundsen was willing to live with that, but Scott's attitude was very different.
Scott wrote that one could not contemplate murdering an animal that showed such qualities of individuality and intelligence, and that one had come to regard as companions and friends.
The handsome husky is the unsung hero of polar exploration. He's proven himself the best pack and haul animal in icy conditions. Amundsen, the first man to reach the South Pole, put his faith in these dogs, and the choice paid off.
If Arctic sled dogs have evolved in such a way as to help us negotiate the most bitterly cold regions of our planet, there's another creature perfectly adapted to life at the opposite end of the spectrum. An animal that conjures images of exotic fables and a description that beggars belief. A creature that is as unique as it is bizarre. The camel. The desert is a harsh landscape, and those who must live and work there or travel across it have always understood its dangers. Heat stroke, dehydration, the most common ways to die in an environment like this. Today, vast highways stretch across many of these wastelands so that trains and trucks can cross in relative safety. However, this wasn't always the case. Vast deserts, impassable to humans alone, once separated the ancient cultures of northern Africa and the Middle East. But these people were not alone. There was one particular endemic beast that helped them to surmount the insurmountable. The one-humped camel, or dromedary, was first domesticated in 3000 BC in Somalia and southern Arabia. Uniquely adapted to life in barren conditions, camels possess a physiology that allows them to go long periods without water and survive extreme temperatures. Most of their body fat is stored in their humps, up to 36 kilograms of it, instead of spread out over their entire bodies. This cuts down on the insulating layer that would have made it harder for them to survive the blistering heat. Camels can lose a quarter of their body weight in water and still survive, something other pack animals, such as horses, could not withstand. Regarded as a gift from God, the Bedouins of the Arabian Peninsula depended on camels not only as pack animals, but as a source of nourishment. Unlike Robert Falcon Scott, who shrank from eating his sled dogs, the Bedouin had no scruples about eating their mounts. They consumed both camel flesh and milk. And they lived in tents made of camel hair. The independent, self-reliant spirit of this nomadic Arabic tribe was forged in part by the freedom of travel over arid terrain that the camel gave them.
A wife can be expensive, can't they all? But to a Bedouin, a first-class camel really is something.
And the very first time that we come across Arabs mentioned as a distinct ethnicity, we also come across reference to camels.
According to the accounts of the Battle of Qarqar in 853 BC, among the coalition of kings fighting the Assyrian army was a king named Jindabu, who contributed 1,000 camels to the coalition forces. Three centuries later, the Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, conquered the Lydians, despite being heavily outnumbered. He's said to have succeeded by sending camels from his baggage train into the fray, which terrified the horses and panicked the Lydian riders.
We're meant to believe from Herodotus's description that the cavalry at the sight of these baggage camels, which really weren't weaponized in any way, the cavalry simply fled and their mounts could not control them. Probably the sight of these strange beasts, larger than themselves, may have inspired significant fear and terror in the animals.
One of the reasons they can be skittish is that even today they carry the genetic predisposition to shy away from possible predators.
I think because camels don't have any natural predators, on the battlefield they're significantly different from horses. They're probably more stable, they don't tend to panic, and they're probably more reliable.
In the following centuries, the camel became not only a beast of burden for the Arabs, but a war animal. The Arab mercenaries recruited by Xerxes I to invade Sparta and Athens in the 5th century BC were archers mounted on camels. But the camel also connected Arab peoples to the rest of the world. Camel trains or caravans regularly crossed the deserts of southern Arabia and northern Africa for centuries, loaded with goods for sale or trade in merchant towns. The desert trade routes were channels of communication and information. Long before the spread of Islam, Arabs knew of the Mediterranean cultures to the north and west. Technology, weapons, and religion moved in and out of Asia and Africa. And all was made possible by the resilience of the camel. However, it wasn't the dromedary that was most commonly used to make this arduous intercontinental journey. That task fell to a close relative. The two-humped camel, known as the Bactrian camel, is thought to have been domesticated as a pack animal in what is now Turkey, around 2500 BC. The two humps and long hair of the Bactrian camel insulate against heat loss in colder climates. Roughly the same size and weight as the dromedary, it's stronger and is able to carry heavier loads. Its tolerance for cold, drought and high altitudes allowed it to travel to regions further afield.
It's not unknown for Bactrian camels, for instance, to be able to carry as much as 180, 200 kilos. And that means that they can transport things. Because of the nature of their metabolism, they can transport things through arid areas, which means that passages through deserts and arid regions, which would otherwise be impassable to humans or humans on horses, weren't such a problem anymore.
And by 800 AD, the Bactrian camel had helped to facilitate the spread of Islam from Mecca into Europe, the Far East, and beyond. The expansion of the Muslim world created far-reaching mercantile networks, allowing Islamic culture and philosophies to spread throughout the known world. It was the beginning of the golden age of Islam, an era that would continue well into the 12th century AD.
Language is often used as an indicator to tell us how important a particular thing is to any given culture. And there are a lot of words in Arabic associated with camels.
Already revered, there was one more frontier this unique beast would help us pioneer. In the 12th century AD, a valuable mineral began to command extraordinary prices all over the world, especially in Europe. It was known as the gold of the desert, salt. In an era without refrigeration, meat and fish could only be preserved by salting. Timbuktu in modern Mali lay at the southern point of a trade route connecting West Africa with its trading partners in Europe, Persia and elsewhere. Timbuktu became a regional centre of salt commerce.
Salt would come south from the salt pans in northern Mali through Timbuktu and then be traded into the Nigerian kingdoms. In order to get from Timbuktu to the North African Mediterranean coast, you had to traverse the Sahara, and the Sahara was only traversable by camel. So traders would move out of places like Timbuktu, head north, take up salt, and then move it further north from there.
And as with all such mercantile centres, Timbuktu became much more than a marketplace. In addition to salt and gold, the thriving town attracted scholars. It soon became a centre of Islamic learning. A university was founded, as well as 80 private libraries and hundreds of schools dedicated to the study of the Quran. Timbuktu became the Paris of Africa, home to a rich written tradition of scholarship and one of the most storied centres in Islamic culture. Today, at least in the West, its name is synonymous with the most remote place in the world, a distant and magical metropolis built on the back of the camel. The opening up of vast expanses of inhospitable landscapes. The connection of cultures by the establishment of unlikely trade routes. The rise and fall of empires. And the spread of Islam, the second largest religion in our world today. All made possible by an animal unlike any other. Today, there are about 14 million camels in the world. 9 out of 10 are dromedaries. Most live in the Horn of Eastern Africa, where they remain an integral part of nomadic life. Around the same time that the Arabs were busy domesticating camels in the Middle East and Africa, further east, there was another wild animal being put to similar work. But taming this formidable beast must not have been easy. The Asian elephant is the largest land animal in Asia. These formidable jungle-dwelling herbivores travel in herds led by a single matriarch. Males usually live a solitary existence. Today, the Asian elephant is mainly a tourist attraction.
Populations of the Asian elephants are declining rapidly because of the degradation of their natural habitat and poachers.
But there was a time in which these magnificent beasts were prolific partners in our endeavours to etch out new civilizations. The first evidence of domesticated Asian elephants dates back to the 3rd millennium BC in the Indus Valley. Elephants were probably first used to carry or drag heavy objects like timber and rock, and to clear forests and jungle in order to build temples for kings.
But I'm sure early on, some bright spark, some military man perhaps, saw that this thing could be very useful in war.
Up to 3 metres tall at the shoulder and weighing as much as 6 tonnes, with strength second among mammals only to its cousin the African elephant, the Asian elephant would have been a terrifying sight on the battlefield. By the 4th century BC, the Sanskrit Ramayana tells of battle elephants tasked with battering down fortresses.
Europeans first encountered elephants in warfare at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Alexander the Great encountering the Persian army.
Viewing the 100 elephants in the enemy army, Alexander is said to have remarked, "At last I've met with a danger suitable to the greatness of my soul."
Alexander, of course, accumulated lots of different tactics as he made his way across the east. And of course, he began with the 15 elephants that he captured at Gaugamela, and he accumulated more until he had an entire elephant corps by the time he got to India in 326.
But Alexander's success in India was short-lived. Discovering that the kings of the Nanda Empire and Gangaradai could deploy between 3,000 and 6,000 war elephants, the conqueror was reluctant to continue his incursion into Indian territory. But Alexander wasn't the only great European general to use elephants as beasts of war.
As great as Alexander was, and as many elephants as he used in battle, the perhaps most famous user of elephants in war was, of course, Hannibal the Carthaginian.
During the Second Punic War in the 3rd century BC, Hannibal's Carthaginian army was encircled by Roman legions in Spain. Bypassing enemy land garrisons and naval fleets, Hannibal managed to lead his Carthaginian army, consisting of 100,000 troops and 40 war elephants, over the Pyrenees Mountains and the Alps and into Italy, effectively taking the war directly to the Roman Republic. A seemingly impossible feat, battling the freezing climate and frequent guerrilla attacks, Hannibal descended from the Alps and into Italy, with just 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. But astonishingly, 37 of the original 40 elephants survived, exhausted and starving, but intact.
It's hard to say, given that, elephants are used to warm tropical climates, what Hannibal was thinking bringing these elephants over the Alps. He must have known that they were somehow inherently robust. That they had great strength and great constitutions, that they'd be able to put up with this.
Over the next 3 years, Hannibal's army inflicted heavy casualties on the Roman armies. But with depleted troop numbers and few surviving war elephants, his assault was stopped, just 5 kilometres short of the capital. Ultimately, Hannibal abandoned his Roman campaign and returned home. In the Far East, the Asian elephant was not only used to destroy, but to build. The Khmer Empire ruled what is now Cambodia from the 9th to the 15th centuries. Their greatest achievement was the capital city, Angkor. Stunning buildings and complexes such as Angkor Wat were built in the 12th century using elephants, and they bear witness to both the animal's strength and the empire's immense wealth. Elephants are featured prominently on the reliefs of Angkor Wat. The elephant gates of the complex are in fact large enough for an elephant to pass through. The Khmer came to rule the majority of Southeast Asia thanks to their skills in warfare. Their armies included archers and javelin men mounted on thousands of war elephants. In India, Cambodia and Thailand, ancient reliefs, colourful murals and towering statues are reminders of the significance of the elephant for these cultures. They were the bearers of kings and the symbols of his power.
Then come the elephants. Weighted down with gold, they lumber along, bearing witness to the wealth, importance and holiness of their royal owner.
Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, is one of the most beloved deities in the Hindu pantheon. He's been worshipped for over 2,000 years. He is a symbol of wisdom and famed for his intelligence. It may be the intelligence of elephants that led to their influence on the portrayal of Ganesha, and through him, their effect on all Hindus.
The elephant's intelligence and its memory are very keen. I mean, the elephants can remember places that they've been. They travel back to those places. They remember where relatives have died and they go back to those places.
The stars of the Bertram Mill Circus have been training for this year's show at Olympia. Hey, there's a girl down there, but the elephant being an elephant won't forget.
Widely revered as the remover of obstacles, both spiritual and material, Ganesha may also be modelled on the elephant due to its sheer size and power, allowing it to shift any barrier in its path.
But elephant power is becoming redundant. Now, as this demonstration at Longmeat shows, it can be done faster, neater and with less effort in newer mechanical ways.
Today, the bulldozer and other motorised vehicles have replaced the Asian elephant as a beast of burden. There may be only about 35,000 left in existence, mostly in India, down from 200,000 at the turn of the 21st century. Ivory poaching and habitat loss have put the wild Asian elephant on the list of species in danger of extinction. They may have already died out were it not for their standing in Indian culture and religion. Elephants will likely live on as sacred creatures in ritual and mythology long after the last flesh and blood animal is gone. We are not the strongest animals on the planet. But throughout our history, we've needed to get heavy work done. Until the invention of machines, we've used the power of much stronger animals to help us grow our food and move it across vast distances, to extend the boundaries of our world and conquer the lands of our rivals. The age of the beast of burden is largely behind us now, a development that many will applaud. But vestiges remain of the days when animals were our automobiles, our tanks and our tractors, and when we relied on them for our very existence. They remain in our cultural mythology, our religion, and the magnificent remnants of a time both simple and splendid.